Okay, so we've got Emma Fryer here. Hi, Emma.
Hi.
Welcome to our little boudoir.
Thank you. Privileged to be here.
Tell me a bit first about yourself and your career, how you ended up at CyrusOne, industry experience, life story. You've got 30 seconds.
Right. Well, I ended up in the data center sector entirely by accident, as most people do. I was trying to help the sector develop Farman arguments back in 2010. I stayed in the trade association Tech UK that represented data centers, and I ran the data center program. I then went to consultant ERM for a bit and saw it all from the other side. And then I came into CyrusOne. I've been here about 2 years, and it's great to be in-house.
And you're Director of Public Policy, is that correct?
Yeah.
Your correct job designation. Now, this event is obviously in Amsterdam, heart of the EU. There's been a lot of legislation, not necessarily around the way that data centers use power or are green or kind of operating policy. There's been quite a lot of legislation and directives around the way that those data centers treat data. Earlier in our pre-show chat, Emma mentioned the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is very much more relevant, isn't it? Do you see that the mandatory standards that we're seeing at the moment about data resiliency and sovereignty, do you see that type of directive also applying more to elements like energy efficiency?
Yeah, and it already does. So we already have targeted legislation in terms of the Energy Efficiency Directive. It's targeted at data centers. It's not a specific piece of legislation, but it's got specific call-outs for data centers and specific provisions for data centers within it. And when you talk about sort of mandatory standards, for instance, within the ED, there is a reporting requirement, which is all about us providing various bits of data, including some that aren't actually related to energy efficiency at all. But a lot of data reporting. That's about transparency, because the Commission needs to understand more about the sector before they can develop policy for it. And I think that's sensible.
Is that an element of, it's the old trope, isn't it, that politicians are 5 years behind everyone else, you know, kind of struggling with their WhatsApp, this kind of thing?
Yes, so it is. And policy is always lagging to some extent. And actually, knee-jerk policy, I'd say, is much more dangerous than carefully developed policy. So actually, we welcome, you know, we welcome the principle, even if we don't quite like all the sort of operational niceties. So yes, you've got this, the ED includes the reporting requirement, which is already up and running, but it also includes two other things, which are very material. One is a rating scheme, which is a bit like the sort of A to G label you see on a washing machine.
On the energy efficiency.
And I'm sure you imagine that putting that kind of thing on a data center, whether it be in Norway or Madrid, is pretty tricky, because obviously the way that data centers functions varies by location, external climate, those things. So there's a whole lot of discussion going on about that. And then the third thing that is part of ED is minimum performance standards for data centers. So they are proposing minimum performance standard for data centers. And there's I'd say a very active policy dialogue around those provisions, because what we want to see minimum performance standards do is remove those facilities that are unfit for purpose from the market, sort of, you know, irredeemably inefficient. And at the moment, I think what they're trying to do is set those standards more as an aspirational standard to say, well, if you don't meet these, you can't be part of the future of the sort of cloud and AI development in Europe. You can't be part of that. You can't bid to provide space in that. And I would say, separate those two things. You set aspirational standards that are much more demanding for that, but you retain minimum performance standards, which are actually not that difficult to me to actually remove the facilities that are, as I said, irredeemable.
And it's not really as simple as PUE, although obviously getting that as low as possible is great. But I can also see difficulty not only, I mean, you mentioned Norway versus southern Spain, for instance. I can see massive possible fluctuations in measurements and type of load, but also over time, you know, between the hours of, let's say, 8 in the morning, Central European time, and 6 at night, there's going to be massive demands on data centers, less so at night. Even those sort of time fluctuations must make any directives coming out, must make it a bureaucratic nightmare.
I'm not sure the thinking's gone to have been that much advanced. I think just a sidebar on PUE. PUE is a really interesting metric. It's very, very good. And I sort of see PUE, Sith or Jedi. It's both. So it's it's a brilliant tool for trend analysis.
Emma is a geek, by the way.
Very, very good for trend analysis. How are you performing? What is the infrastructure overhead in energy terms of this facility? It's much worse for comparison because your PUE in Norway will always be better than your PUE in Madrid, given everything else being the same. And the other problem with PUE, it's become very dominant. People obsess about PUE at the expense, for instance, of water use or other sustainability credentials. So it's, as I said, it's both Sith and Jedi. It's incredibly powerful. Some ways, and it's actually leading us down the wrong path in other ways because it's encouraging us not to look at those broader sustainability credentials that we really need to focus on.
And the elephant in the room at the moment is AI. And
is what, sorry?
Is
AI.
Yeah, AI. What does that stand for? We're not sure. So at the moment, there is an enormous amount, hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars almost, being plowed into data center development. Is there a danger, do you think, that when the AI bubble bursts, that a lot of European data center investors, operators and builders will, I wouldn't say be left with facilities on their hands that are useless, but do you think there's a danger that people are overreaching at the moment in terms of plowing money very quickly into new facilities for an AI bubble that might not be there in a couple of years?
I think
this might be a dangerous opinion of your own as opposed to something from
Well, I'm not an
CyrusOne.
investor, so I can say what I see in the market. What I see in the market, and this is from my sort of jack of all trade, master of none, public policy position. I see America, leading this. So there's a huge amount of investment going into AI training facilities in the States, large scale AI training. That's because, essentially, but I'll take one step back. In Europe, I'm not seeing the same thing. And the reason is that you have if you look at the three main workloads, up to now, 90% of stuff has been driven by cloud. So the cloud has been the driver for data center capacity in everywhere till recently. Now we've got a demand for AI training workloads. Cloud workloads need to be in very sort of specific clusters because the cloud infrastructure is a meshed infrastructure to enable that the services they provide at point of views are uninterrupted. Yeah. Now, that means everything's going to be quite close together and the locational attributes of cloud facilities are very, very strong. When you come to training workloads, those facilities could be anywhere.
Yeah.
So they will always look at total cost of ownership. They will chase cheap renewable power, ideally. And that's not generally in Europe other than in the Nordics. So I'm not seeing huge demand for large-scale training AI workloads in Europe at the moment.
Yeah.
Where I think the demand will come is the inference. Now, inference is when you're delivering the AI, essentially. And that does have locational views because it needs to be near demographics, but it's not as specific as the availability zone clusters that we see for cloud. So what I'm anticipating may happen more in Europe is that we will be looking more to develop the AI capacity for inference, and that will be near enough to the clusters that you could flick it to cloud if you need to, because the demand for conventional cloud is set to continue to increase. And actually, there's plenty of future capacity in cloud, so that even if we, didn't build out for AI, there would be that capacity could be taken up by cloud. Yes.
Yeah, and just from a technical point of view, I assume that inference, can that also more or less be anywhere? Because I'm thinking now that, is it going to be 3 milliseconds or 7 milliseconds? Does that latency matter so much at the inference stage?
It depends. I think it depends what you're developing, what you're delivering on that. So for things that are to do with, traffic management or machine to machine, yes, then your latency is really important. But I'm assuming there'll be other things. But, we don't really know.
Yeah.
I think. And I'm probably the last person You are.
Me neither. We experts, we know nothing. I'm a green hippie at heart. So the environmental factors and the environmental issues around data centers always play very strongly with me. What I'm seeing is in the US, the environmental factors are not necessarily coming over as strongly or as important in the minds of people investing in data centers. And it's very much a stronger ideology in Europe. Is part of the problem, probably the wrong word, I'll use it anyway, is part of the problem with getting that environmental message over, one that environmental savings take time. You know, it might take 5, it might take 10 years. You know, you have a high capex because you're plumbing in really environmentally friendly water recapture. But in 5-10 years time, that's when that starts paying off. Is it a difficult sell outside of Europe to kind of get that longer term thinking imbued into data center builders?
I can talk about inside Europe, but my remit is Europe. So I would say I can talk about it being, how we deal with that in Europe, if that helps. So within Europe, I would say, yes, these things can have a higher capex, but you are then reducing, if you have it. The obvious thing is you have a more energy efficient data center, you reduce OPEX over time. I think the expense we see, I think in Europe that sometimes we struggle with is what I'd call the compliance cost of this sustainability. So it's not actually doing the right thing that you can justify. The asset life is 30 years. And I know you might want to see ROI before then. Hopefully, it's still a long asset life. So you have that in mind. But I think sometimes you have quite burdensome costs of compliance with some of the sustainability legislation, where you're spending a lot of resource going through the compliance nuts and bolts as opposed to doing the thing you need to do. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
That's the thing. So we very rarely object to the aims of sustainability policies and regulations, but sometimes we do think, couldn't we do this in a slightly more simple way or have a little bit more freedom in how to achieve the outcomes that they seek? The other thing I would say about sustainability is that I think if you invest properly in sustainability, it helps to de-risk your projects in 2 ways. Firstly, in terms of public acceptability.
Yes.
And secondly, in terms of climate change resilience. So, for instance, we have systems that don't use water. They have closed loops. So although we have to fill the closed loop with water to start with, that just goes around continuously. So when people ask us about, are you worried about, access to water and water resilience? No, we're not, because the operational use of water is absolutely minimal. And that in a way. So if you see what I mean, if you can use that to manage your risks, then I think you can see a much broader benefit from sustainability in addition to doing the right thing.
I can also see data centers as an industry, the data center industry, growing and growing, and not necessarily because everyone's plowing billions into AI, but everything's becoming digital. The cloud is still very much the favored medium for data exchange. And as the data center sector gets larger and larger, do you think it's incumbent on the sector to start lobbying governments and lobbying for instance, renewable energy? And almost actually going one step further, and the profits maybe from your data center operations being plowed into energy sources that aren't coal and gas and so on and so forth.
I think the sector already does. I mean, CyrusOne, all our energy in Europe is procured, is renewable. So that all the electricity we use in Europe is renewably sourced. We still use very occasionally our diesel generators to test them, and our understanding is we're moving that over to HVO.
Yeah.
But I think what I'd say about energy is that our role in the energy transition is to be a good anchor customer. And data centers are perfectly positioned for PPAs. We have high flat load.
Yep.
We have an asset life that's sort of in line with the PPA horizon, funding horizon. And by doing that, we can essentially fund additional utility scale renewable power.
Yeah.
So I think the PPA model is a very good one. We don't want to be generators, but we're very happy to work with partnership and provide that demand for that transition.
Yes.
And it's essentially underwrited.
Yeah, I mean, it's predictable. And as you say, average lifespan 30 years. So you're going to say, okay, we'll have a gigawatt between now and...
Yeah. And what we would perhaps need help in there is, we're a mid-sized operator. We need help in terms of aggregating the demand. So we have a number of operators. There's certain elements of that process that would need to be de-risked because obviously we lease our facilities. And in a sense, we need to have PPAs that are more aligned with our leasing timelines than actually the facility timelines, because we don't want to be left with stranded assets. But that's how I see it. I see that we can help underwrite that transition if that's done in partnership. But I see a partnership approach as being the one that would work rather than us turning into generators.
And finally, I always drop this question in to everybody I interview, and they all hate it.
All right.
So in 5 years' time, you're still at CyrusOne. Obviously, you've been promoted to CEO by now. But in 5 years' time, where's the company going to be? What's it going to be doing? And you are being recorded, so we will check up back on you.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'd like us to have helped to lead a much better public understanding of data centers.
Yes.
Helped people link in their own minds the digital services they know and love with the physical infrastructure that is needed to support them. And if we can achieve that, that would be my public policy ideal, actually, as opposed to maybe the corporate ideal, to help people make that link and understand what we do.
Yes.
And also that, that running the internet is actually a career destination choice. I think I'd be very happy with that.
Okay. Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Emma.
Pleasure.